Daniel's here. Correctivity for homeostasis, and thereby autonomy and sovereignty for European peoples, genus and species. Social accountability and correctivity, structured by a concept of genetic unionization. Okay, while I have some time left on my Streamyard allotment for the month, this would be a good place to read not quite the original, but close to the original DNA Nations paper, as this one edited by Professor Kevin MacDonald. Now, it was proposed by me back in 2012 to run, I hope to have it run at the Voice of Reason network. That was just before that network went under, and it was just a part of my efforts to overcome the neo-Nazis and Jesus people there, in addition to the generally naive and their inherent instability, which, of course, that's part of why that network got taken down. And Matt Parrott was a bureaucrat who was obstructing me for his whatever reasons. He didn't give any good reasons why he didn't want to run the paper. But he's a Jesus guy and a bureaucratic personality, and egotistical. So I thought to move around him, and I went directly to and proposed the idea to Professor MacDonald for him to perhaps run at Occidental Observer. And to my delight and surprise, originally anyway, MacDonald liked the idea. I'll read his email in response to me, and went so far as to edit it to make it more to his liking to run at the Occidental Observer. That never came about, and somewhat of a mystery as to who was against it, but I don't see any good reason for it to have been obstructed. That's 10 years ago. And but that's about the time that I came over to Majority Rights, and while the article was run there and a few people seemed to recognize that this was a good idea to go with, it was never really taken up, not even by Bowery, who I forefronted in the idea with the hopes that he would recognize that his ideas are being respected, incorporated, then he was respected, and that he would help facilitate the idea. But just yesterday, I was engaged in arguments with him as to what he was supposed to object to about this, and or something. It didn't even. It was bizarre. I'll read his comments. They're not even relevant. But anyway, so I want to read the original paper from that MacDonald edited, and then I'll try to get into some of the comments. Hopefully, save some time for discussion. If not this time, then this weekend. Okay, then. Let's go back to the email from Kevin MacDonald. It was on 20th of April, ironically enough. That's HH's birthday, but that was not deliberate on my part. So that's nothing that I would celebrate. Kevin MacDonald says, Daniel, is it the idea to post the identical article on several sites in order to get wider visibility? That's fine with me. Some of the wording was a bit hard going. Can it be edited? Kevin MacDonald. And I say, pleased and yes, it can be edited. Dear Kevin, my central concern has been to get the essay published online. To publish it in more than one place is not my goal in particular, though you're not objecting to that is very kind. Indeed, I am happy that you would consider publishing it at the Occidental Observer. Yes, of course it can be edited. If you have any questions for that purpose, I would be glad to help. Sincerely yours. And here's a link to Bowery's Laboratory of the States idea. Is that majority rights? And then Kevin MacDonald responded on April 23rd, 2012. Daniel, I went over it and sent it for your approval. However, it seems to me that this is premature until you actually have a site where people can sign up. Kevin. Okay, so here is MacDonald's edited version, which includes this kind of links to which includes links that obviously you can't hear, but they're it's 1,200 words. So in other words, quite short. And that's important to emphasize now, because one of the objections by Bowery is that it was 32,000 words or something like this, because he did a word count of the post with all the comments and everything else underneath. And then the other, well, since I'm here with Bowery, the other absurd objection he raised is that for some reason, and it's never made any sense to me, I'm supposed to, according to James, I'm supposed to come up with a novel version of conflict resolution. And until then, all else is supposed to wait. It doesn't matter that, I tried to include apparently it doesn't matter to him that I tried to include his sortocracy idea, which is where his conflict resolution is ensconced, into the paper from the start. And that if he thinks that some novel idea of conflict resolution has to be introduced, then he can argue for that. I'm not stopping him. So his objections are just absurd. And furthermore, I set to put him in front, and still would, I suppose. Anyway, but it's a hell of a lot better, I dare say, than hoping that the eastern U.S. cities will get nuked, which was, last time he spoke with MacDonald, he was expressing despair and said, well, maybe Putin will nuke the eastern cities, and that will allow us to get back to yeoman farm areas. It's like right wingers. What can you say? But I think that here we go. Here's the version edited by MacDonald. It's 1,200 words. The EuroDNA Nation. James Bowery's Laboratory of the States platform proposes separatism through free choice, as people may vote with their feet to establish human ecologies through controlled experimentation. The control will be established through freedom from association, that is, the freedom to not associate with others. However, under the current circumstance, efforts to instantiate these deliberately organized human ecologies are best conducted in an implicit manner. Indeed, under the circumstances, they must be largely implicit. See note number 1 below. Bowery suggests promoting abstract terms such as our valuation of freedom of choice. Later, the communities would be able to enforce explicit freedom of and from association. Rather than state-sized units, county-sized political units are apparently optimal, the sheriff and county being the most viable and manageable scale of organization in defense against the nation-state apparatus in its death throes. The right of dwelling, association, and doing business within a county is granted by the consent of the people established in that particular community. Members would have the prerogative to deny association with anybody they deem unwanted. People who tried to impose themselves on that group and insisted upon violating their non-consent would be treated as serious criminal offenders. This freedom from association is corollary to individual freedom and of choice and association. Bowery argues that strong valuation of freedom of choice is a distinctly white characteristic and therefore precious. I concur. He elaborates further that it is imperative to maintain the unique human ecologies that evolved within this white characteristic of individual freedom of choice. I concur as well. This freely and deliberately chosen state-county human ecology is very different from the deeply situated, naturally evolving human ecologies of Europe and Russia, where our people have evolved over tens of thousands of years in relation to particular habitats. It is surely critical for us to maintain these ecologies as well. We would not want to be without either the freely chosen white state county-sized ecologies derived by choice within a lifespan, nor without the truly deep historical ecologies of our European and Russian nations. These are both goods that we would want to maintain, and yet they are very different concerns. The task at hand for white nationalism is to coordinate them. We would not really want to give up either, but how to coordinate these goods, these two goods. This is where the Euro-DNA-based nation begins to look like a potential means of coordination, allowing for various expressions of our native Europeans while never losing sight of their essence. There is a third crucial matter to coordinate. If a white nation is to have an economy big enough to fund a space program and other large projects, it is likely to need a size larger than the average state, let alone county, to provide for a sufficient economy. And if, as Conrad's, a white nation is to hold up to the growing power of China, it will need to be large. Thesis. The indigenous Euro-DNA nation would provide a means for coordinating smaller white states' counties, both freely chosen and those of a deep historical evolution, while providing the means for pursuing its larger manifestation as well. Given the anti-white hegemony that whites are up against from above, along with the turmoil and throngs of anti-whites that they are up against on all fronts, an endogenous approach is the most practical for the coordination of white separatism. By endogenous here, we mean from the inside out. That is, in proposing a white separatist nation, we should begin with those who would like to be a part of it first. Begin by focusing on what we can do as opposed to what we cannot do. It is endogenous also in that the nation is corporeal, literally of the people, their native European DNA being the prime criterion for inclusion. That would be in contrast, though not in opposition, to other white nation building efforts, using an exogenous from the outside in approach, such as the Northwest Front. There are clear practical advantages of the native Euro-DNA nation that begins as a formal declaration of a wish as confirmed by voluntary signatories. Firstly, signing up would only mean that one is expressing a wish to be part of a white separatism. It does not require relinquishing one's current citizenship. The indigenous Euro-DNA nation focuses from the start on our most precious concern, our DNA, while not encumbering us with present obstacles to land-situated nations. The Euro-DNA nation would be non-situated in the beginning and to some extent always. However, DNA without land, without habitat indefinitely would be problematic for a number of reasons. Therefore, it must be an objective of the Euro-DNA nation to establish sacrosanct Euro-DNA nation lands eventually. The plurality of lands is a deliberate usage. In fact, more safety and resources could be provided if these lands are non-contiguous and dispersed throughout the world. Naturally, the white nation would seek to reestablish its traditional territories as white, particularly those in Europe, but also North America, South America, Russia, Australia, and New Zealand. Nevertheless, In not being strictly contingent upon obtaining land, the nation is rendered more flexible and more practical so that it can start with land claims of any size, even small claims. Once coordinated as such, its ultimate viability may strive to control the largest, that's a word that, its ultimate viability may strive to control the largest land masses possible. Now I say cover the land masses possible. MacDonald changed it to the word to control, and which ironically met up with some resistance that was really a matter that was not my fault, so to speak, from Bowery. So let me read that again. Once coordinated as such, its ultimate viability may strive to cover the largest land masses possible. Thinking about these issues first as a means of coordination with Bowery's Laboratory of the States platform, and in line with that, the DNA nation being freely chosen would allow people to select various native European subcategories if their genetics match. Some distinct, some perhaps blended in various ways and degrees. Considering the problem, secondly, in terms of how to coordinate a white nation of the largest possible size, it also provides a highly practical means to attain the goal of covering a protracted expanse, as it is highly flexible in its ability to cover territory. Again, MacDonald chose the word of controlling a protracted expanse. The DNA nation is also practical in that it does not require unnecessary risk and engagement on the part of participants. Signing up does not render one complicit with illegal activity of any kind. It only means an expressed wish for separatism from non-native Europeans and to be with persons of indigenous European extraction. Separatism is the first step, separatism is the ultimate aim, and separatism is always possible. If you wish to express a wish that you might one day be part of this separate Euro-DNA nation, you may sign up and specify particular categories as you wish. DNA proof will ultimately be required for consideration of membership. The native European DNA nation sign-up along with its subcategories will be provided. Note 1, the freedom of and from association promoted by the Laboratory of the States counties is conceived by Bauer to be an implicit choice. In his estimation, explicit whiteness does not work. Taking the example of the draconian legal constraints placed on American realtors regarding the mere mention of race to buyers or sellers provides a salient example of how hazardous explicitness can be. However, the explicitness of the DNA registry does not contradict the implicitness strategy due to its being voluntary and not representing a legal status, but rather an expression of a wish. Discretion is nevertheless advised. Okay, so that's the original paper. I suppose I might have time to read into a few of the comments of objections surrounding it. Although I don't want to go into that too heavily because I'd like to try to save a little more time for Streamyard this weekend. Okay. Let's see. So there you see that MacDonald originally liked the idea well enough to consider running editio and edit it for that purpose. I don't know if he just backed off of himself, but it seems rather that some of these right-wing people who circulate around Occidental Observer, like the neo-Nazi types, like I think in particular the Christians, and like Matt Parrott in particular, who, by the way, was a website operative at Occidental Observer at the time, would be an obstruction. And there's a whole thread about that, how he thinks that the idea was, quote, wrong at every turn, which I'll save for another time, but he's been a problem in obstructing the idea for no good reason. And but apparently that MacDonald has backed off for the sake of, at the behest somehow of Christians, neo-Nazis, and the scientistic, perhaps. Basically, people don't like me because I don't love Hitler and Jesus, or what, and whatever other reason they might. It's just, anyway, he didn't run it. And I've, even as recently as a month ago, I asked him if he would reconsider, and he said that he might, go along with it if, if I get it, if it takes off somehow with other people, I guess. And I did run it over at Majority Rights, and like I said, it didn't got. Some people think it was good, recognizing that it's good, but not a great deal of help, and not from Bowery, which was the original idea of putting him in there. I kind of went out on a limb in trying to accommodate Bowery. At the risk of being sawed off by people who don't like where Bowery's coming from for his individualism, for this guy, which he does heavily emphasize. But I see part of the motivation for his individualism, and also how it can be accommodated. Put simply, for white guys in the context of America being thrown into a situation and forced to integrate with people from everywhere that you wouldn't want to integrate with, the last thing that you'd want to be is social. So your first concern would be to protect your freedom from association, your way out. And I completely understand that. The problem there is, for some reason, even though it's not hard to understand that, firstly, it shouldn't be hard to understand from Bowery's perspective that I'm not asking him to be social with people that he doesn't want to be social with. It also shouldn't be hard to understand for people like Guest Worker and it was Graham Lister over at Majority Rights, who really didn't like Bowery. Lister didn't. That I'm not trying that I understand their fairly opposite position, that they are trying to keep people together, that they want England to be for English rather, and they are therefore resistant to this kind of liberating idea of freedom from association as being forefronted. And the thing is that anybody who reads past the second paragraph, which if people hate Bowery, they often won't do, they're not going to understand that this is a way to integrate and manage both concerns. It's all been very annoying. They'll just say whatever they can. Oh, it's not a... Never mind. Let me see what else that I might want to read before I I close up in hopes of saving some time for this weekend. Let's see if there's any more. I already mentioned Bowery's supposed objections. It's a complicated psychology and not good reasons that I guess better off not getting into now. I'll save that for next time when I discuss obstructions and arguments. Yeah. He doesn't give a good reason not to participate and facilitate this. Nobody really has. So I'll save that for next time. Although I will say, it's an important segue. Bowery does, in his quote, Bowery maintains that I should be, for some reason, come up with this novel idea of conflict resolution. I do have ways of conflict resolution, of course, but he will contest that they're not novel enough or something, and that they should, that his idea of pairwise duels is, which is, the sine qua non for him, is, the ultimate way to to resolve conflicts. I'm sorry to laugh, but but along with that, it's it's an expression of his kind of overly scientific, to the point of scientific point of view, where he is intent on seeing this as a way that supposedly could have resolved the territorial disputes between Germany and Poland after World War One, and the popular and really ill-informed position of American white nationalists, who are mostly German, and therefore susceptible to pandering. That Hitler just wanted his territory stolen from him back, and so Bowery can cater to this mistaken mindset that the Versailles Treaty drew its boundaries was so wrong. I said, well, it could have been resolved with voting with your feet, or this tax negotiation, and I'll go into it next time. But the point is that in doing that, he is saying that the people who've been put in place by Frederick the Great's imperial aggrandizement, the Germans put into Polish lands and dissolving Polish nationhood, would be empowered to vote to stay in place, taking nothing account of the history. That's where hermeneutics comes into play, and Bowery doesn't take into account of who lived there before Frederick the Great's imperial aggrandizement. And before you think that's irrelevant to Hitler, that's this was Hitler's idol. The very last decree that he issued was to have Frederick the Great's tomb disinterred and moved further into Germany. So Hitler was an imperialist. And that, again, that becomes relevant when you when you hear the talks of, Bowery wants to apply that mode of conflict resolution also to the Donbass, this very empirical, in the now way of adjudication, taking no account of history into the matter. Now, I don't want either Zelensky or Azov Battalion or anybody else to engage in a hot war over this region. I don't think that it's the right way to go. I'm sure it's not the right way to go. But it's not so simple a matter that this region should just be voted on with the people who are there now, because the Russians moved into this region after the Holodomor killed the native Ukrainians and Cossacks that were there. So it's really not with the it's not the flawless idea that Bowery would present it as being, and certainly not an idea to put on hold the DNA Nations project because it's like, I'm supposed to come up with a better means of conflict resolution. Well, I probably could with the introduction of hermeneutics, but I'll save that for next time. But anyway, this matter of what he's doing when he talks about, when he caters to this, and he's still doing it, this beleaguered by political correctness German majority of American reactionaries and the stories they want to believe of World War II. It does become relevant in terms of the capacity for European peoples to coordinate, because this is, of course, our enemies are going to want to emphasize and encourage those like Mike Enoch who are going to try to get behind Hitler redemptionism. And Warren Baylock he thinks that in many ways he is very clever. That's the problem. He is very astute, and his and Emily Yukas's podcasts do have much insight and excellent rhetoric, but there's a blind spot in their faith, remaining faithful to Hitler and Hitler redemptionism, and it shows. I mean, despite the fact that they recognize enemy infiltration, you hear Warren Baylock's speech about the loss of the cities, the white loss of the cities in America. It starts off, of course, with how German people were moved after World War II, west over the Oder, and there's when catering to this German American reactionary crowd, this has been just taken for granted that history begins in with Frederick the Great, and that this land was stolen from the Germans, and that Hitler was right to try to take it back by war if necessary, that he was a man of peace, which is absurd, and that that after the war, that the only thing they care about, despite the fact that Hitler got his harebrained imperialism got 50 million Europeans killed, including Germans, of course, and the destruction to the warrant of ethno-nationalism. The only thing they seem to care about is Dresden and the fact that Stalin moved these people, and Stalin moved these Germans over the border. But really, this is where I'm supposed to feel is my first grievance about the whole situation of World War II. I mean, this stupidity is why this total imbalance is why it becomes important to address this issue with where Bowery's coming from, and now that their oversympathy with Hitler, and now their oversympathy with Putin, of all the damn things. Okay, so just briefly, one comment. The point being that it wasn't that far back in history that Prussia invaded and took this land from Poland, and yet that is where history always seems to begin with American WN, with no help from Bowery's emphasis on empirical resolution in plebiscite or tax negotiation in situ, absent hermeneutic historical consideration. Not even given the fact that Germany had just lost a brutal first war, which arguably, I would argue, along with Hastings, was largely at their blame. After its destruction, it is valid to ask Who were they to complain except in the currency of America's pandered to white German reactionaries? But Hitler was not the great statesman that Greg Johnson, functioning under the misdirection of William Luther Pierce's false currency, among other false currency, held Hitler to be. And I quote Greg Johnson as saying, quote, to quote Greg Johnson, on balance, I think Hitler was the greatest statesman of the 20th century and a genuine great man of history. Greg Johnson, yes, that Greg Johnson of Countercurrents said that. And so now Bauer's making the same convenient historical oversight with regard to Ukraine's eastern provinces, or rather, what were Ukrainian lands before the Holodomor. Lands which have been important for mineral and industrial resource. Now, were I empowered with the decision, I would not countenance fighting by Ukraine for these provinces, not fuel a war, whether by Zelensky's Operation Clean Break regime, courtesy Nuland, her husband Kagan, or oligarch Ihor Kolomorsky, or by whatever neo-Nazi contingent may exist of the Azov battalion or anyone else. Not worth it. Go for soft melding of the Ukrainian-Russian relation over time. They are indeed more kindred than Poles and Germans, but conceding these eastern provinces to Putin would have been enough for the time being. His imperialist war is an absolute disgrace. There's no excuse for him not to join in coordination with true ethno-nationalists in alliance against the neoliberal mulatto supremacy of the West. A civic nationalist, Putin is a civic nationalist presiding over an imperialist kleptocracy with the veneer of Orthodox Christian countenance and oligarch support, which is largely kosher. Tacit approval from Israel, probably Shabbat Lubavitch, whatever other thugs from Chechnya, even Africa, that he might deploy. Now, this is a digression from the DNA Nations project, but goes to show, but it's a digression that is somehow, well, Bowery anyway, is requiring me to discuss, that is to say, conflict resolution. Not really discuss. He wants me to be beholden to his method of it. As opposed to, and as if that's, for one thing, mutually exclusive to the DNA Nations project. Now, to conclude, what does he say? He said, Daniels had provided a link to each of the word counted documents. Again, he said that it was 32,000 words, and I hadn't addressed 32,000 words, and I hadn't. Where is it? Quote, DNA Nations, 200K words and no clear mechanisms defined for dispute processing. And then he says, property money, 20K words and mechanisms for individual belief-based monetary system, property rights enforcement, delivery of social goods. Well, the first big problem there is, firstly, let me just say that it's not mutually exclusive, these concerns to the DNA Nations. And secondly, his word count is an absurdity because the document is counted. The Kevin MacDonald version is 1,200 words, very short, and a later version updated is 1,350 words, very short. So finally, but Daniels says, I provided a link to each of the word counted documents. Do us the same courtesy for your 1,000 word essay if you claim it to be a succinct description of the dispute processing mode offered by your proposal. Well, I just did, and I just read it, and it's 1,200 words. That just goes to show how fucking dishonest that you are. That link will show that your word count includes comments. the essay is 1,200 words long. And then he adds, and if you're going to bring into state of nature as goofy, what I'm talking about is a pairwise dual stuff, and it is goofy. Then you need to also include details on how you plan on dealing with prisons or the state of ultimate exile. Well, I did address in quite lengthy essay his pairwise duals thing, and I'll talk about it next time. But the point is, he says that I have to show it's incumbent on me to outline a novel way of dealing with these things, or outline a way of dealing with these things. And the truth is, I have to do no such thing. If he thinks it's so important, he can do it. I don't have to do everything. You don't go to a concert violinist and say, until you can show me that you can fix my car, I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let your orchestra perform. That's what it's like. It's just it's absurd. And furthermore, I do. Oh, never mind. Okay, let's see if we can save some time. All right, that'll be it for now. I'll see if I can come back this weekend for a discussion on the obstructions to this idea. Bye for now.